He's just a bartender. That's what my dad said when I walked in loud enough for everyone to hear, like he wanted the words to stick to me forever. My mom laughed, my sister looked away, and the room kept spinning around their pride like nothing broke. But it did. Something inside me cracked when my sister's new husband shook my hand and froze. His smile disappeared. He looked me up online, and in seconds the whole room went silent. My father's voice, the one that used to fill every space, vanished under the weight of one truth he could never control. I wasn't just mixing drinks. I built the empire behind the glass he was holding. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say, listening in the comments, or let me know where you are. I love hearing how far my story reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. And if you want to walk with me through stories like this where silence breaks and truth speaks louder than pride, don't forget to subscribe. My name's Caius Rourke, and this is the story of how one wedding changed everything. I landed in Charlottesville with a carry-on and a promise to myself: show up, say congratulations, and leave before dessert. The rental car hummed over a gravel lane cut through neat rows of late summer vines, Hawthorne Hall glowing ahead like a postcard of a life that never belonged to me. The envelope sat on the passenger seat, heavy with embossed letters, and the soft insult: I couldn't unsee my name without a +1. I thumbed it once, then checked my phone. A message from Portland lit the screen. The new Vine batch had cleared QC pallets wrapped for the Spain distributor. The shipping team wanted my final okay. Real power lived in warehouses, signatures, and people who showed up on time, not in rooms where my family pretended I wasn't there. I tapped approve, slid the phone away, and stepped into the wind that carried champagne and cut grass and the hum of other people's pride. Inside Hawthorne Hall was all vaulted ceilings and glass chandeliers fat enough to crush a compact car. The reception energy crackled linen laughter that bright performance people save for nights when they're being watched. I moved along the edge, letting the room happen without me, until a thread of too loud laughter snagged my father's voice. Barrett Rourke spoke like a man paid by the decibel. He had a half-circle of relatives pinned near a side table, and the smirk he wore whenever he thought he was educating the room. He's still mixing cocktails in those basement clubs, he said, like it amused him, like I was a story he'd told so often the ending felt true. A cousin I barely recognized snorted on cue. My mother Paula lifted a hand to her pearls and laughed the way you clear a smudge off crystal. I didn't correct them. I didn't even slow down. I just let the words pass through me the way I learned to let them pass years ago, and kept my body out of their spotlight. The side corridor opened into an anteroom where a mobile bar had been rolled against a stucco arch. A small sign on the counter made my step hitch: House Tequila Vine Blanco. Someone had centered it just so the serif letters clean and quiet as a heartbeat. I watched the bartender, freckled forearms, rolled sleeves, tip a bottle over fresh ice and slide a shot to a guest in navy satin. Smooth, he said, almost proud. I didn't introduce myself. Not yet. I took in the thump of bass through the floorboards, the chill condensing on the neck of my own product, the way fate sometimes sets your logo down in the exact room where you've been mistaken for less your whole life. From the main hall, applause rose and fell. I drifted back just as the MC called for the wedding party to preview the seating chart. Delaney, my sister, the girl who used to steal my hoodies and ask me to taste her cookie batter, appeared in a dress that looked poured on. The bouquet hit a tremor in her fingers. When her eyes landed on me, she stopped. One beat, two. The soft shock of recognition, the calculation, the look over my shoulder to see who else had seen her seeing me. "We're just doing a quick check," she said, but to the air, not to me. The MC waved her forward. She turned, and the train whispered after her like a secret she didn't want to hold. I found my name at a back table tucked beneath a sconce, the social equivalent of a storage closet. It made me grin. Put a person around a long enough corner and you teach them to become their own front door. On the linen near my place card lay a small printed menu that echoed the sign at the bar. There was no way Barrett had chosen Vine on purpose. He prided himself on imported labels with vowels that gave him excuses to over-enunciate. Someone on the venue staff had made the call because the distributor delivered quality on time because the sales rep did their job. Nothing to do with family. Everything to do with work. I slid the menu into the pocket of my jacket the way you might pocket proof of a private joke. I stood again, orbiting the margins, letting the chandelier light break across my shoulder as I passed, letting my breath slow to something steady. The first sting of his laughter had already burned off in the room's heat, leaving behind the cooler truth I came here to serve. I wasn't going to win an argument tonight. I was going to let gravity do it for me. The emails from Portland, the embossed card without a +1, the fact that the house tequila was mine, 3 quiet lines that together made a sentence even my father would have to read. I decided I'd stay just long enough to watch the story turn by itself. If the bar was the stage where truth performed best, someone else could pull the curtain. The jazz trio had switched to something light and clever by the time the newlyweds finished their circuit of family hugs. Servers threaded between clusters of sequins and tuxedo shoulders with trays of crab cakes and tartlets that pretended to be dinner. Under the tables, screens lit faces from below little private moons. I was finishing a club soda when Delaney arrived with her husband in tow. "This is my brother," she said quickly, like she was trying out the word in public for the first time. Caius. Weston Hale was the kind of man who makes a living believing in data more than stories. He had the fit of a gym membership and the calm of someone who checks the exit maps in every room. His hand was dry and firm. He smiled the way people smile at someone who will not be staying long. "Good to finally meet you," he said. He held my handshake a fraction too long in the way men do when they're testing for leverage, then let go and kept looking. He started and stopped, and the second curiosity touched caution, he pivoted to his comfort zone. He tilted his wrist just enough to catch the glow off his watch glass and used it to hide the angle of his phone. I watched the tiny reflection flicker letters bolding into my name, then the company, then a headline placed by other people in rooms far from this one. His smile fell without drama, like a stage light cooling. Paleness rose from his collar into his cheeks, a tide, meeting a line of shore it didn't expect to cross. "I'm just gonna grab a drink," he said, "and it came out too, even the way you talk when the blood in your ears gets louder than the music." He tapped their joined hands against Delaney's bouquet as if to say, "I'll be right back," then disappeared toward the arch where the mobile bar waited in its pool of yellow. Delaney turned the practiced brightness of the bride slipping. "What did you say to him?" she asked. It came out half accusation, half plea. I didn't get the chance to say anything I said. She studied me like there was a test hidden in my face and she hadn't revised for it. Someone called her name from the dais. She glanced over her shoulder. When she looked back, her eyes dropped to the folded place card in my hand, the edge of the menu peeking out of my pocket, and then without meaning to past my shoulder toward the bar. She left the question in the air and moved away, the bouquet lifting like a shield. I stayed where I was, not casual, not stiff, just present. The trick to surviving a room that doesn't want you is refusing to be pushed out of its frame. At the bar, the bartender set a bottle down with a thunk I could feel in my ribs. He was talking to Weston. The freckled arm gestured at the Vine Blanco, the clean bottleneck beating in the conditioned air. I didn't need to hear the words. I knew the script. We trained our partners to say the right things because good liquid deserves good language. The bartender smiled. Weston didn't. He looked past the label toward the archway where I stood and then back at the phone he'd lifted again to confirm what his gut already knew. That's how the fuse lit, not with an announcement, not with me, with curiosity. With a man who made a habit of verifying claims, learning he was married into a narrative that didn't hold up under search results. He walked away from the bar without a drink and went instead to the long table where his groomsmen were dealing out compliments and napkins like playing cards. He leaned in shoulder to shoulder, said a single sentence, flipped his screen so one of them could see. The groomsman's mouth shaped an O, that universal vowel for "I didn't see this coming," and then he stood up a little straighter. Phones came out the way umbrellas do when the first cold drop hits. Under linen in the soft shadow of floral towers. Faces glanced down, scrolled, glanced up at me, glanced back down. I watched the room in reflections off a champagne bucket across the silent depth of a sideboard's lacquer in the tiny convex planet of a cufflink. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was something quieter and more exact, like a weight finding its proper shelf. Somewhere behind me, a server slid a fresh tray of amuse-bouches past, and the scent of lime and roasted pepper cut through the starch of the evening. I breathed it in and smiled, because even the air had started saying my name. Delaney reappeared, catching Weston in transit. He spoke with the urgency of someone trying to wrap a story in cloth before it spilled. She cut a glance at me that landed and skittered away, and now it wasn't just worry in her face. It was the first tremor of a truth pushing back. Her gaze dipped to my jacket pocket again, where the menu edge still showed House Tequila Vine Blanco. I didn't move. I let her do the math. Let her remember the pictures she'd posted last Christmas, captioned whole family, with a very obvious hole, the engagement party invitation. I never got the bedrock of small exclusions that had been poured and polished until they looked like taste instead of cruelty. A groomsman brushed my shoulder with an apology and a sideways look meant to be discreet. "Hey," he said, like we'd been friends in another life. Crazy brand. We stocked it at my place in Miami. Went fast. He waited for me to claim the thing he'd come to confirm. Then, when I didn't, he gave me a quick nod that meant message received and took the news farther down the line. In a corner, my mother watched with the tight smile of a woman smoothing a tablecloth already stained. She'd come to fix the room before, and the room had always let her. Tonight it was fixing itself, pulling stories back into alignment, one search result at a time. Across the floor, Weston paused beside the bar again. He looked at the label like it might blink. The bartender said something. Weston shook his head. The jazz slipped into a standard, and I caught a line about truth under my feet. I thought about the vineyard outside, about the planes and pallets and payrolls waiting for me in places where last names didn't override work, about the embossed card on my passenger seat, and the missing +1 that told me everything I needed to know about the people who sent it. Delaney took one more step toward me, and then the MC called for speeches, and a tide of bodies turned toward the dais. The chandeliers dimmed to the romantic dim that makes belief easier. My father stepped into the light with the confidence of a man who still thought the microphone belonged to him. He hadn't yet seen how quickly a room can change its mind. I set my glass down, felt the switch flip somewhere I couldn't see, and wondered not if the curtain would lift, but who would be the first to pull it. When the story starts leaking from the other side's wall, Hawthorne Hall stops being theirs, and for the first time all night I felt like I'd walked into a house that might finally hear me knock. Barrett caught me halfway to the bar, glass in hand, his grin carrying the same sting it always had. Still working the counter, son, he asked, his voice loud enough to claim the air. I didn't answer. I walked straight past him, stopping at the counter where the bottles lined up in neat symmetry. The bartender, a young guy with sunburned cheeks, glanced up. I nodded toward the shelves. "Where do you source your tequila from?" He smiled. "Vine Spirits out of Portland. Smoothest Blanco we've had, clean and bright." "Good," I said quietly. "I'm the founder." He froze. Then his eyes widened and his face broke into a grin. "No way. That's amazing, man. We pour your stuff all the time." The words carried further than he knew. A small silence spread through the room, a ripple across the surface of polished glass and chatter. Behind me, my father's voice vanished mid-breath. I turned just enough to see his hand stop halfway to his mouth, the glass trembling. Light from the chandelier scattered across his face like shards of his own pride. A bridesmaid nearby whispered to another, then out loud, "Wait, is that him? The guy from that article?" Her friend pulled out her phone. "The Bartender Who Built a Liquor Empire." She read the title, slicing through the air like a verdict. My mother appeared quick but poised. "Julian." She started catching herself on my real name. "Please don't embarrass your father." "I haven't," I said calmly. "I only confirmed what's printed on the bottle." Barrett said nothing. His fingers whitened around the stem of the glass. For years he'd spoken for everyone in this family. Tonight even his silence made more noise than his voice. The bartender, oblivious, was still smiling. "Man, that's wild. Your stuff's the real deal." The words landed heavier than they should have. Every look turned toward my father, now expecting measuring, waiting for a line that wouldn't come. And for the first time in years, he had none. The laughter that used to fill every room I entered didn't end with an argument. It just ran out of air. When I turned to leave, the bottle of Vin Blanco caught a shard of light. My logo glowed like a signature, calm and permanent. I didn't need to explain a thing. The truth had spoken for me. And I thought, when a label says more than a lifetime of words, what story do they have left to tell? By dinner, the room had shifted. I'd been placed at the far end, out of sight, almost off the map, but now the space around me was filling up. Chairs scraped closer, small talk bent in my direction, curiosity tugging people toward the new center. From the dance floor, Delaney and Weston finished their first waltz. The applause was softer, now scattered. Eyes drifted from the couple to me, to the corner where my father sat too still. My mother leaned close to him, whispering something sharp. He didn't answer. Aunt Delia arrived first, perfume thick enough to hide discomfort. "Caius, darling, we always knew you'd make something of yourself," she said too brightly. "That's strange," I replied. "You never asked what I was making." Her smile stiffened. A few guests caught the edge in my voice, and the murmur grew. My father's glare cut across the table, but I held his gaze just long enough to let him know I wasn't 12 anymore. Then a sound cut through the chatter, a video playing from someone's phone. The groomsmen laughed, half-drunk curiosity winning over discretion. On the small screen, the Vine Spirits commercial filled the air, my voice. Over my distillery, the copper stills gleaming behind me. The bartender from earlier must have told them. Weston moved fast, trying to hush them, but the spark had already caught. "That's him," someone whispered. "That's the guy." Across the room, my mother's smile faltered. Barrett's hand clenched around his fork, his jaw set like granite. Delaney appeared at my side. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "About all this." "I know," I said. "You never asked." Her face flushed, guilt and realization tangling in her eyes. Weston called her name, and she slipped back into the crowd bouquet, trembling slightly. A toast broke out at another table, someone raising a glass to the entrepreneur in the family. Polite laughter followed, brittle and unsure. Barrett stayed seated, Knuckles' pale eyes fixed on the tablecloth. I didn't smile, didn't move. I just sat in the space that used to reject me and let the silence reshape itself around the truth. The room's hierarchy had inverted itself in less than an hour. For years, my father's voice had dictated who mattered and who didn't. Now all he could do was listen to strangers say my name. When dessert was announced, I stood, straightened my jacket, and caught my reflection in the glass of wine before me, clear, steady, unshaken. The story had shifted hands. And as I walked toward the terrace, I could still feel their eyes following, full of confusion and the quiet awe people reserve for realizing they were wrong. Inside, under the chandelier, Barrett was still sitting there, his kingdom intact but empty, his silence heavy enough to drown in. For the first time, I didn't look back. The sky over Hawthorne Hall had turned the color of champagne left too long in a glass. The band fell quiet as Barrett stepped onto the wooden dais. The lights tilted toward him, catching the gray at his temples, the gold on his cufflinks, the posture of a man who still believed the room belonged to him. "I am proud of my daughter," he began, lifting his glass. The words rolled out with practiced warmth, his voice deep enough to carry through the vineyard air. For a moment, it sounded like every other toast he'd ever given, controlled, measured, designed to draw applause. But the rhythm faltered. Around the table, screens blinked to life, one after another, like tiny fires in the dark. The glow from a dozen phones lit faces, mouths whispering behind napkins. Someone near the front leaned over to whisper, "Is it true?" Another checked the headline. I watched from my chair near the back half in shadow glass in hand. Each flicker of light was a new search result. The words, "Vine Spirits," flashed on screens, followed by "Caius Rourke, founder." The whispers grew legs. The room started to breathe differently. Barrett continued, trying to outpace the noise. A father's pride as he didn't finish. A cousin from Weston's side spoke up, his voice cutting through the polite hush. "And what about your son?" he called out. "The guy who started that tequila brand, Vine Spirits." A ripple of sound followed, like fabric tearing. Barrett's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He blinked, caught between outrage and disbelief, then forced a laugh that cracked mid-breath. "I don't know who you've been talking to," he said finally, the smile collapsing around his teeth. "You must have me mistaken." Even the band didn't pretend to tune up. The quiet was surgical. I sipped my champagne, the bubbles soft against my tongue, and let the scene unfold. From a nearby table, someone gasped. A short video began to loop on one of the guests' phones the moment at the bar earlier that evening, the bartender's grin, my voice saying, "I'm the founder." The caption under it read, "When the family's bartender owns the tequila brand." Within seconds, it was everywhere. The air filled with the faint buzz of notifications. The glow from screens reflected off wine glasses and silver cutlery, turning the wedding into a theater of light and disbelief. Barrett saw it. He saw himself framed in it, the smug father, the public punchline. His hand trembled. Then the microseconds of pride gave way to fury. He gripped the mic harder, his knuckles blanching. "Enough," he said, but no one stopped watching. He slammed the microphone onto the podium, the feedback shriek slicing through the music and laughter. His glass toppled, spilling gold liquid down his suit. Paula rushed forward, whispering his name, but he pushed her hand away. "I won't be humiliated in my own family," he hissed. Cameras caught it all. He turned, stormed off the stage, and the crowd parted like water. The sound of his footsteps against the deck echoed far longer than it should have. I didn't move. I just watched the shadow of him disappear through the archway toward the parking lot, the image of a man trying to outrun the truth. My mother stayed frozen for a few seconds, clutching the hem of her dress as if the fabric could hold her upright. Then her eyes swept the room, seeing what he couldn't, the pity, the murmurs, the sideways glances. She pressed her lips together, the mask breaking. "Excuse me," she muttered and followed him. The band hesitated, unsure if the show was over. Weston stood trying to calm the confusion. Delaney turned her gown glowing under the light's eyes darting between me and the empty podium. She crossed the space between us faster than I expected, voice sharp with panic. "What did you do?" she demanded. "Nothing I said. I didn't do anything. I just let them see." She stared at me like she wanted to believe it but didn't know how. Her mascara had begun to smudge a faint shadow under her eyes. "He's your father," she said. "I know," I said softly, "and I stopped lying for him a long time ago." Someone's phone pinged again. Then another. The glow pulsed like heartbeat rhythm across the tables. The video had gone beyond the wedding now. Notifications were stacking faster than the waiters could refill glasses. Laughter rose again, not the kind that flatters, but the kind that cracks open what used to be sacred. When I left the table, the night air felt cleaner. The vineyard stretched out under the stars, rows of vines catching the last light of the lanterns. I could hear the buzz of conversation behind me, the rustle of silk, the slow unraveling of a family's script. I didn't feel triumphant, just still. Because sometimes silence is the only weapon that leaves no blood. By morning, the clip from the wedding had over 500,000 views. Someone had tagged it, "When pride meets proof." My father's name trended next to mine. I didn't share, didn't comment. I didn't need to. When a lie finally drowns, the splash is always loudest at home. Who in that house would dare look me in the eye first? 3 days later, Richmond felt like a different world. The wedding had turned into a headline, then into gossip, then into silence again. The kind that hides behind embarrassment. I found a quiet cafe downtown, all brick walls and soft jazz, the kind of place where no one looked twice at a man sitting alone. Weston Hale was already there, his jacket off, 2 coffees on the table. "Thanks for coming," he said. His voice carried the uneasy politeness of someone unsure if they were a friend or a witness. He slid a manila envelope across the table. It made a dry sound against the wood. "You need to see this," he said. Inside were printed emails, screenshots, text chains. My name jumped off the pages, surrounded by lies. Caius is struggling. He's in debt. He's bouncing between bars again. Lines written in the neat punctuation of my father's sentences. My eyes moved faster the more I read threads with cousins, with business contacts, even with Paula. One message to Weston's mother. Don't mention Caius around Delaney. He's not doing well. It would only distract her happiness. Another worse, an attached photo of me during a distillery installation, grime on my shirt captioned, "Lost another job, poor kid tries though." The emails dated back 5 years, a whole narrative carefully curated. Every rumor that ever found its way to me now had an author. I looked up. Weston was watching me nervous. He sent those to everyone, he said. He told my family before the engagement that you were unstable. Said you'd probably show up drunk to the wedding. I believed him. I sat back, the weight of the papers pressing against my palm. And yet I said you looked me up. He nodded, shame plain on his face. I did. I check people out. It's what I do. But when I saw who you really were, I realized I'd been part of something wrong. He didn't just exaggerate, he fabricated. I didn't speak. I kept reading. One email caught me like a hook: Barrett's message to a Chicago investor warning him against joining my funding round. Unreliable. Doesn't finish what he starts. My throat tightened. I could almost hear the tone, the same voice that had lectured me for years about success and image. Weston ran a hand through his hair. He told me once he was protecting the family name, he said. But that wasn't it. He was protecting himself from you. The noise of the cafe faded to a hum. Cups clinked. Someone laughed by the counter. Outside cars moved through the morning sun. I turned another page, saw my mother's messages echoing his words. He's a good boy, just lost. We try not to talk about it. For years, they hadn't just erased me, they'd rewritten me into a cautionary tale. Why show me this now? I asked. Weston hesitated. Because I was complicit. And because you deserve to see the size of what he built on your back. He pushed another sheet forward. This one you should know about. The printout showed an email chain with my Chicago competitor Barrett offering market insight in exchange for a consulting retainer. A retainer that existed solely to block my company's distribution deal. He didn't just want to hide you, Weston said. He wanted you gone. I folded the pages back into the envelope, my pulse steady. Anger would have been easy, but it felt small next to the clarity I felt. He tried to delete me, I said finally. And he almost succeeded. Weston nodded. I don't know if this helps, but I'm sorry. I thought your silence that night was arrogance. Now I think it was control. Maybe both, I said. We sat for a moment, the weight of it between us. Outside sunlight hit the glass hard enough to throw a reflection across the table. It landed on the envelope like a seal. Weston leaned forward. What are you going to do? I looked at the papers, then at him. The same thing I've always done, I said. Let the truth stand on its own. He built this lie one email at a time. I'll undo it in one delivery. He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't need to. I stood, sliding the envelope into my jacket pocket. Weston's final words followed me out the door. Sometimes the truth only counts if the person who buried it has to read it. I turned once before leaving, the sunlight spilling down the narrow street, and said I know exactly which desk it belongs on. The door closed behind me, the bell above it ringing once a clean, bright sound. The cafe noise swallowed it whole. On the drive back to Charlottesville, the wind pressed against the car windows, steady and insistent. The envelope sat beside me on the passenger seat, heavier than it should have been. Ahead, the road curved toward home, toward the study where Barrett still thought his word was law. I wasn't going back for revenge. I was going back for balance. Because stories only rot when no one opens the window. By the time the vineyards came into view again, the sun was low enough to set the bottle glass in the distance aflame. I drove faster, the envelope safe beside me, thinking of the only question that mattered now. When the lie was finally in his hands, would he even dare to read it? The house looked smaller than I remembered, slouched under the gray Virginia sky. The air smelled of damp wood and something old that refused to leave. I knocked once and walked in. The walls hadn't changed, portraits, awards, the echo of a man who'd built his world out of appearances. Barrett sat behind his walnut desk glasses, low on his nose, the lamp throwing a warm circle on the papers spread before him. He didn't look up until I was halfway across the room. "So," he said, "you've decided to visit." I placed the manila envelope on his desk. "You should read this." He didn't touch it. "What is it now?" "Another attempt to make me look like the villain." "It's what you wrote," I said quietly. "Not what anyone else said. You can decide if it still sounds like the truth." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "You ruined your sister's wedding. You made us all look like fools." I met his eyes. "No. I showed up, and the truth spoke louder than your version of me." His voice hardened. "I spent my life keeping this family's name clean, and you became the one thing you couldn't control." He rose, hand flat on the desk. "I sacrificed everything to protect this family." I pulled a single page from the envelope and laid it in front of him, his email to my Chicago investor, the one that cost me a deal years ago. He read just the first line before looking away. "I did it for the family," he muttered. "For the family," I said. "You erased your son to protect a surname." His jaw tightened. He reached for a pen, gripping it so hard it shook. I closed the envelope, slid it toward him. "I'm done letting you narrate who I am," I said. "I didn't come for forgiveness. I came to return what's yours." He didn't answer. Behind him, the house creaked in the silence. My mother appeared at the door, voice brittle. "Caius, please." "Everyone just misunderstood." I turned toward her. No one misunderstood. They just believed whoever shouted loudest. I walked out without looking back. The sound of the pen hitting the desk followed me down the hall. Outside, the air was cool, the wind moving through the oak trees. For the first time, I felt light, not victorious, just free. He could keep the house, the name, the silence. I was done living inside it. 8 months later, Austin sunlight streamed through the glass of my new office. On the wall hung a framed photo from Portland, the day we opened the first Vine distillery. Everyone in it was smiling, sweaty, alive. My inbox buzzed with a feature titled, "The Man Who Redefined Craft Spirits." 30 states' new partnerships record growth. I closed the tab before finishing. I didn't need the praise to know we'd made it. A message from Delaney appeared. "I'm sorry for believing what I was told." I replied, "Just be honest from now on. That's enough." Then Weston's email arrived, a picture of his newborn, red-faced and perfect. "Middle name's Caius. Thought you should know." I stared at it for a long time, unsure what to feel, then smiled and shut the screen. By noon, legal sent a request from a small firm in Charlottesville seeking a licensing deal with Vine. The name at the bottom called her Ames, my cousin, the one who'd laughed the loudest that night. I typed one word in the response, "Declined." Later that day, I signed off a wire transfer, the Rourke Grant, for hospitality education scholarships for kids who couldn't afford culinary school. The signature line bore my father's name, not mine. I wanted his legacy rewritten, not erased. A week passed before the letter arrived, no return address, only one word scrawled inside: "Why?" I sat by the window, sunset spilling across the desk, the light catching the curve of a Vine Blanco bottle. "Because legacy isn't what you leave behind," I said aloud. "It's what you build while you're still here." I poured a small glass, the tequila glowing pale gold, and let it rest between my palms. Outside, Austin hummed alive, forward, indifferent. I thought of my family, my mother's quiet denial, my father's silence, my sister's late apology. They were still my blood, but not my direction. I took a sip, clean and smooth, and watched the light shift through the glass. I didn't need to win anymore. I just needed to live without permission. If anyone ever asked whether they were still my family, I'd say yes. But they're no longer part of the story I'm writing now. Sometimes the hardest truth to face isn't what others said about you, it's what you allowed them to make you believe. For years, I let silence write my story. But walking out of that house, I understood peace doesn't come from proving anyone wrong. It comes from refusing to be defined by lies. If you've ever been the one left out, dismissed, or rewritten, I hope my story reminds you that you still get to take the pen back. Legacy isn't built from approval, it's built from persistence from showing up anyway. And if you've made it this far, I want to thank you for listening. Drop a still here in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. I read everyone. Because stories like this aren't just mine, they belong to anyone who's ever decided that truth is enough. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to keep walking with me through more stories like this, where silence breaks, pride falls, and honesty finally wins.